All right. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Construction Corner podcast. I'm Dylan. I'm your host, joined by my new co-host, the blue collar badass, Matt Vetter. Matt, how's it going?
It's going great, Dylan. It's another nice Friday, chilly week here in Michigan, but we're getting through.
Guys, this week we have a special guest. We were so impressed with her from our roundtable episode that we aired a few weeks ago. Tauhira Ali, she's an executive director at NECA, formerly at Milwaukee, and now is focused on their kind of product innovation. Tauhira, welcome to the Construction Corner podcast.
Thank you so much, Dylan. And Matt, it's great to meet you. It's great to reconnect, and I'm so excited to be here with you all and wrap up the week.
Yeah, especially doing these on Fridays. I know Matt was joking a few weeks ago that we might see him with a beer or something like that, since we're 3 o'clock on a Friday here.
This is the celebration, right? It's the good conversation, and we can all end the week on an inspirational note.
Definitely on a positive note. Regardless of what happened during the week, this is kind of a hour or so to just decompress and have some good conversation and move into a nice weekend.
Yeah.
Now, from our roundtable a couple weeks ago, we talked technology, innovation, but there was kind of maybe a good starting point. Well, first is to kind of give your background for anybody that might not have listened to that last episode, but kind of a little bit of your background and where you're coming from on the construction side of things.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, I am the executive director of industry innovation for NECA. And that's the National Electrical Contractors Association. So we represent the union electrical contractors, about, a huge part of the specialty contracting industry. And so how I kind of got into this position, it's a bit of a tale, but my background is in advanced technology. So I worked on things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, robotics. And to be honest, how I got into that field was I have 2 degrees in mechanical engineering with a computer science focus. So I wanted to build machines and make them smart. And how I got into that field was the fact that I was actually really bad at math and science. And I had some really great teachers and mentors who kind of encouraged me to poke deeper and to find the why. And so to kind of rewind and fast forward back to how I got into the construction industry, I came up again doing very technical work, very detailed work. And one day I happened to be in Wisconsin at a tour from Milwaukee Tool, just kind of a, learn about the company sort of situation. And I saw this opportunity that I'd never in my life seen of being able to focus on products and design them and be completely user focused, because the people who are designing your products at Milwaukee Tool are not necessarily people who've been, lifelong career driven in the trades. So they're not blue collar champions, as you said. And so having the ability to really focus in on the user piece was so huge. And so I spent many years at Milwaukee. And one of the things that I learned there was the ability to, again, focus on the problems at hand, right? It's not about the next best drill or the next best saw or even adding Bluetooth to, anything you can. It's about dedicated user-driven solutions to solve the industry's pain points. And that's really what allowed me to grow in my own role there and, learn about and preach about and advocate for construction technology. And we've kind of created this movement in the industry, those of us who care about construction technology, that it's really about culture, it's about passion, it's about people, it's about the process, and then the technology comes after. And so I'm delighted to be a part of the NECA team now. I've been here almost a month, so you're catching me on week 3, but it's just so incredible because now I get to be that one step closer to the contractors and that one step closer to the people who are actually building the buildings or putting in the wiring and looking at the new low voltage or electric vehicle or microgrid opportunities and truly help to support them as they continue to build the future.
That is impressive to say the least. Notwithstanding your current title, Executive Director of Industry Innovation, does that fit on a business card?
Well, luckily, we don't go anywhere these days because
There
of
you go.
COVID, so I don't even need to worry about that, right?
I like the title. It's very official. I guess my first question would be, what does that role really entail at NECA?
So that's a great question, and I'll be honest with you. The thing that excites me the most about being the head of the industry innovation team at NECA is that we are really focused on innovation at its core. So the idea of, whatever you're doing, figure out a way to evaluate, are you doing it the best way possible? Could you be faster? Could you be safer? Could you be more, not just more, efficient, but more effective? And so it's all about how do you continue to grow not just the technology piece of it, which is a huge part of innovation and what we most traditionally think about, but also the strategic and the business development piece. So it's as much about change management and that growth mindset and looking with a critical eye on how you disrupt your own behavior and disrupt your own innovation as it is, what's the next robot, what's the next headset, what's the next Bluetooth, IoT device that could be changing the industry.
Very neat. Very neat.
I guess with that, so being, NECA, right, the overarching arm for all these hundreds of thousands of electrical contractors, across the U.S. and really the U.S. in a lot of ways sets the stage for kind of the rest of the world and our practices and codes and everything like that. And obviously, so I'm an electrical engineer, so this is right up my alley. But for a lot of this and just talking change management from like the NECA side of things, obviously with trade associations and the ability to get out in front of your people fairly often. Granted, we're not doing that as much in person anymore through conventions or anything like that. But how does NECA go about kind of pushing some of these best practices out to, again, you've got hundreds of thousands of electrical contractors, from residential all the way to utility scale, installations. So what's kind of one of the methods that you guys use to outreach to, this broad group of people?
Well, that's a really great question. And I think COVID has really put us in this position. And I learned this in my role at Milwaukee as well as my time at NECA. You really have to almost innovate yourself, right? Look at things from, how can you improve and how can you be ever more impactful, create ever more opportunities and channels and connections to help people grow. So at the end of the day, it still all goes back to construction being a people business. And so what I find to be really powerful is you want to approach it in as many ways as possible. You want to always be making a positive impact, whether you're talking to, executives at the top, or you're talking to governing boards, or you're talking to, the one-off, the apprentice, or you're talking to students who are studying construction management. It's all about helping people understand that these are problems we can tackle one step at a time, one incremental change at a time. And one of the really great things about, the vehicles that we have to do this is that there are so many out there, right? There's podcasts, there's webinars, there's direct phone conversations. Let's not forget that, before people started going to these big conventions, just being able to pick up a phone and call someone. And now we have that elevated because now you can pick up a phone and see someone like we're doing here. So that's a really powerful thing as well. And then there's the virtual conventions. There's the, just grabbing a quick, one of my favorite things to do is to just grab a quick 15-minute or a 30-minute call and just connect with someone and talk to them and learn about what they are looking at, what's worrying them, what they're doing to prepare for the future of their business. And we also have some really great avenues. NECA puts out several different podcasts, including the Innovation Overload, which is one of the podcasts that my team and I created kind of around the idea of how do you handle this overload of information. And there's also so many industry standards, right? You've got your trade organizations. So, NECA is a great example that's always putting out education. You can go do training, whether it's training on, how to be a better estimator, how to be better at project management or coordination, or even, technical trainings like learning more about Bluebeam, or learning more about Revit, learning more about BIM 360. And then there's also some of the maybe the lesser known but incredibly powerful vehicles out there include learning about industry research. So going to places like, NECA actually has a nonprofit arm called Electri. And so it's like electric without the C. And so electri.org actually has free reports for everyone in the industry that are carefully curated by the Electri foundations and boards around specific topics that are important to all of us. So that's, a really great free resource. FMI has great reports, Dodge Data Analytics, ENR, the list goes on. So again, from a NECA perspective, we are really, really focused on how do we bring targeted information to those within our network and those throughout our network to make sure that we're working with our partners to deliver the best results and the best conversations. From an industry as a whole, I think the opportunities, whether you're interested in digital content, whether you're interested in a peer group or a conversation or even a periodical, right? There's still those paper magazines that are out there, like Electrical Contractors, one that allows you to learn more about what's going on in your neighborhood, in your district, but also in the world.
That's great. You mentioned, getting to know people and doing your 15-minute, 30-minute conversations. And to me, it started off as an annoyance with COVID, having to do all the Zoom meetings and having to look at yourself in the screen next to this person you're talking to, but it's completely become a great way to quickly engage and get to know more people on a worldwide scale. We couldn't have done this last year. Well, we could have, but we probably wouldn't have gone this route, and it involved travel, which we can't do right now easily. And it's great to hear and to see different groups using this technology we have, that we kind of got forced into, but you're using it for a real positive purpose.
That's so true. And I've read about, especially this time last year, and as things started to slow down, you heard all these fears about 2020 being the year of lost innovation, the year that everything just ground to a halt and we all shuttered our doors and everything stopped. And the truth of the matter is that everything didn't stop. We just learned to innovate in a different way. And it almost became the year of burgeoning innovation. So, whether you all of a sudden found yourself putting, all of your files on a cloud-based network, or you were investing in things like the VPN networks, or you were looking at Zoom versus Teams versus Skype versus GoToMeeting, so many platforms out there got a boost from this idea of we all still have to connect. And what's also really powerful is so many companies and their cultures got a boost from how do you connect in unorthodox ways to continue to drive these conversations. One thing, for example, that was really powerful that happened at NECA during that time is there was actually a deliberate effort, not just to, put your cameras on, which you hear about the cliche of, cameras on engagement, like you said, but even an effort to create an opportunity for employees to take turns telling stories about themselves and sending it to the whole company and then nominating the next person, so that you actually got to people you've worked with for 5, 10, 20, 30 years. You actually got to know them on a whole different level. And who would have made the time? Who would have made that deliberate intention to connect in that way had we not been in the situation where we weren't sitting next to each other anymore?
That's a great point. We at Schaefer Construction, we're a much smaller firm, but we kind of got into the same sort of thing. And through meetings like this and even on our social media channels, we kind of started introducing our team to the world. And we had time to do that sort of thing that we never really had thought of doing before. It keeps the human element human.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that's also really cool is I've heard from a lot of contractors out there that they actually saw their younger employees start to step up more because of working remotely, because it's the easiest thing in the world. And I think we've all been guilty of it. When you're sitting next to someone, when you're, just down the hall from the people who've been doing whatever you're learning for so many years, whether it's estimation, whether it's VDC, whether it's the accounting side, it's the easiest thing to just get up and go ask them. But now there's that extra layer, and especially millennials, Gen Z, a lot of the newer generations are not so comfortable, or were not so comfortable with making a phone call. So people, especially in construction, have started to see this, their younger talent is rising more because they kind of have to go through this exercise of figuring things out by themselves before they make that call or before they reach out for help. So it's, in a way, some of these opportunities are allowing us to have our teams excel.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was always one of the biggest things that I learned, and especially early on in construction, is to pick up the phone, right? Like there's no transcript of those phone calls most of the time. So when it comes to the fourth phase of construction and litigation, that those things are not recorded or written down to come back and bite you, but always pick up the phone, have a conversation. It comes across not only for that, which we all have to worry about in construction, but also for just an ease of communication, right? There's a lot of intention, tonality, things that you're not going to pick up in an email that you can get across a lot better when you're on the phone with somebody, to make sure that you're understanding it correctly. And then on top of that, now with screen sharing and all that kind of stuff, you can pretty easily collaborate, make sure that you're looking at the same thing, the same set of drawings at the same time, so that everyone's on the same page and not looking at two different versions of something to move forward. And I guess this brings up a pretty good point in that, we're in the construction, and you made this point at the roundtable, is we're looking to build communities, right? We're not looking, one of our biggest assets in construction is the people, right? Not just the buildings that we build, the roads that we create, but all the people and knowledge that gets retained through the industry. And one of the things too in that, that NECA is doing a great job of, is writing articles and having things that people can go back and look at, into podcasts that are a whole new way of communicating. And I guess, what are you seeing for contractors and some of the ways that they're able to not only share the information, which I think we've talked about, but kind of help retain some of the best practices within their firms? I think knowledge retention has been, and this is across construction, whether it's a contractor design firm, that knowledge retention becomes one of the harder things. You have somebody of 30, 40 years experience that you want all this information and knowledge that they have to pull out of them, but they're not going to write a white paper, but they'll have a 2-hour conversation with you, no problem. But how does kind of knowledge retention and knowledge transfer, what are some of the best practices that you've seen?
I think that's such a great and interesting topic to think about. And especially, because it is, our status quo is to remain at the status quo, is to always kind of do, neurologically, we want to do what we've always done. And I have to tell you, one of the things that's been incredibly powerful, and for those, those listeners and those we have who are tuning in today, one of the most incredibly powerful things that we have right at this moment in history is that we are more connected than we've ever been before. Whether you're looking through a trades lens, like you said, or through an owner or a general contractor, or any a technology provider, a manufacturer, any level of engagement can be amplified. And so we talk about these virtual conferences, and yeah, it's a bummer because you can't be in person in the same room together. But what you can do is, now you don't have to pay for the travel to send your team to some fancy destination because there's a conference going out there. Now you're not paying for the hotel room. And so we've actually even seen conferences where, instead of just paying for one license for somebody to attend the event, or one ticket, you can actually go and you can actually pay for essentially a company ticket or company attendance. And that'll give you several licenses that can be used. And so that's something that's been huge, because now, when there's a technology conference, you don't just have to send your BIM or VDC manager or your head of IT or your CIO. You can actually have the safety person be there. You can actually have, again, some of your journeymen. You can actually have your project managers, your estimators. You can have different people going and looking at things through different lenses. And I'll tell you from the standpoint of how do you make sure you retain, how do you make sure that information is shared? One of the best things I've ever done with any team I've ever worked with is when we send people to an event, we always have them come back and share, just 3 things you've learned, 3 things that will affect the company. So what are you personally learning? Because so many of these events will have, professional or personal development. So what are you personally learning that might have changed your life? And what are you seeing for your company or seeing for our practices that can help elevate or change or just even incrementally help us get started down, considering a different path. So that's a really powerful thing. And I'll give you guys a little bit of inside baseball. And I don't think I've ever told anyone this, but when I go to shows, whether they are virtual or in person, I always try to engage with at least someone else, one other person, to where I and that person build up enough rapport that I can then say, hey, is it okay if I call you in 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is? Can I just give you a call? And this interesting thing we're learning about today, can we just touch base in 6 months from now on how this thing has changed the way you do your job or the way you live your life? And it's so amazing because it enriches what you're able to do, and it helps you. Again, it doesn't have to be something that every day you're changing a new piece, but just that one little bit of accountability with someone who you've now connected with, it creates such a strong network effect.
That's hugely powerful. Thank you for sharing that. It stretches the collaboration, but the accountability is great because so many people, whether they listen to podcasts or go to the events or pay for coaching, there's so much information and new things always being thrown at us. It's hard to grab them sometimes and to follow through with it. And if you learn all this great stuff but you never implement any of it, you're not really moving forward on the ladder at all. So that's a fantastic idea, the kind of built-in follow-up. I'm going to write that one down and use it myself.
Well, and I mean, I'll put it to you this way. The most powerful thing you can do is make a decision. Whether it's a decision to adopt something new or not adopt something new, you're still making a decision either way. And so having the ability to think critically, again, it goes back to this is what innovation is. And it's so fascinating. As someone who comes from a very technical background, I love machinery. I love electronics. I love putting new solutions together in a way that changes the world. That being said, not every solution is right for every situation. And one of the things when we talk about technology, when we talk about innovation, so often you hear people talk about, oh, you got to go paperless or you got to employ the software, like Excel is this dinosaur. But for some companies, depending on the size, depending on the business, depending on a myriad of factors, for some companies, going from paper to Excel is huge. For some companies, they don't need to use the biggest software platforms out there. They don't need to be on the best data lakes in the industry. They might just need to be using, QuickBooks or Microsoft Teams or FaceTime on their phones. And that, I think, is the coolest part of innovation. It doesn't have to be a one size fits all, or here's my check that I'm going to write for this R&D budget. It can be, what is that one small thing that you can do to change what your path is? And it starts today.
It's the 1% better every day theory, right?
Exactly.
As long as you keep moving forward and growing, we all do it in different paces at different levels, but I thought you were going to tear into the Excel and QuickBooks users, and I was going to have to butt heads with you because that's what we still do at Schaefer Construction. But it's not to say that we don't look at other technology, because we always are. I'm constantly looking for the next greatest app or some communication technology that we haven't seen yet. But it's also difficult, given we're a small company. So given our size and our revenue, we don't have budgets available to, lock in Procore or some of these other really great platforms, but we also know how to survive without it. And, as long as you keep growing, you keep moving forward, I think that's the key.
Well, and I think it's also interesting because sometimes your solution can have nothing to do with technology at all. So I've seen companies make huge gains by moving the porta potties once a month. Moving to a system where you have your lay down area, you have your makeshift tool crib on the job site, but instead investing in everyone having one of those U-line carts, right? If you can have your tools next to you, if you can have your equipment next to you, if you don't have to walk, get on a lift and go down 20 floors just to use the bathroom, think of how that changes every single day. You're making that small change and you're making a huge difference, not just in your worker comfort, but also in the safety. You're exposed to less. Also in the productivity, you're not wasting as much time looking for your tools. Also in the morale, in the engagement. And so again, innovation doesn't have to be, like you said, it doesn't have to be a license fee. There's nothing against those license fees, but everyone's at a different spot. And I think that's the secret, is you have to kind of bloom where you're planted, figure out where you are and figure out how to grow and change with what you have.
I think that, you're spot on with all this stuff, and that when we think innovation, right, everyone goes to AI and software and robotics and all this really fancy stuff that for the most part isn't necessarily the cheapest either, but that what we're ultimately getting at is waste reduction, right? That's the thing that we're ultimately driving for, is increased efficiency, happiness, that you want some return on whatever you're investing, right? Whether that's somebody taking half an hour to move a porta potty up, a floor, or 10 or whatever, that's hugely important, and it saves a bunch of other time in it. Whether that's safety and increasing, the how people work, whether that's through a new tool or just in a new practice, right? It doesn't have to be these big, robust things, but you're looking for something in your process to improve and reduce the amount of the wasted time. And especially like on job sites today, we don't want as many people on site. So you're looking to find ways to improve, your workflows, your efficiencies, your throughput, for all that. So I think, and we mentioned this on the roundtable, was waste reduction. And I think that's really the core of this, is to really help your people be better at everything that they do.
Well, and you hit on something really interesting too, the idea of, you're helping your people. And that brings me to something that I think is always on people's minds when they think about or talk about the pain points of our industry, which is the talent acquisition, right? You got to get people, you got to get them in, you got to train them up, and you got to get them to stay. And then you got to elevate them. And that succession planning is now more than ever something that's on so many people's minds. And this is where, again, technology, it drives, efficiency, and it makes your people better and more effective at doing what they're doing. But it also can help you to bring people into the industry. And it can also help you to create those avenues for people to shine. So one of the things that a lot of the companies that I work with, that I really, advocate for them, is how can you say there's too many solutions, everybody's busy, there's so much going on, and all of that is true. But maybe instead of everyone at the top trying to figure out all the solutions, as might have traditionally been the case, are there people in your company that you can set about elevating them, giving them a specific task, putting them on a task force, giving them a specific challenge, or even just saying, hey, you know what, we're open for comments, we're open for improvements. And, something as simple as in a sense, the suggestion box, and give people an opportunity to become champions and become advocates and elevate themselves within your organization, because this is how we continue to grow, and this is how we continue to invest in our people in ways that they will invest back in us.
And it builds engagement, right? And when people feel that they're valued across multiple levels, they're more likely to stay. They're more likely to be a better worker, a more efficient, productive member of the team. Exactly.
And with the fact that we have such a challenge with skilled labor, and the fact that we have, this generational gap, we have people among 5 generations all in the workforce, everyone is motivated in a different way. And just because you have someone who is an expert at the specific craft that they've been doing for 30 years does not mean that they are the best at using cell phones or using Zoom or using, any of these digital platforms. None of this is a shock to any of us. So how can you find the people who maybe don't understand the industry as well because they're newer to it, and pair them up with the people who really know a lot about, bending conduit, but maybe don't know that much about how to, take digital 360 photos off their phone, and give people a chance to, everybody likes to be appreciated. Everybody likes to contribute. So give people a chance to contribute with the skills that they're best at, and then also give them a chance to build and learn from the skills that they do have gaps and where they can improve upon.
I love that. And Dylan and I have talked a lot about, this topic, excuse me, the topic of our industry as a whole, the construction industry having such a huge labor problem, a huge shortage of skilled labor coming in. And, we've kind of bounced that idea around quite a few times of, telling the young new person on the site to go hang out with the old guy, the 30-year vet who's been doing whatever he does for so long that he's an expert at it. It's all part of that collaboration effort. And you nailed it just now, because the young guy or young girl or whoever now is bringing a different viewpoint and bringing different skill sets and different talents. And even just through osmosis, the two parties now are going to be better for that engagement, for
Absolutely.
that relationship.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, like I said, I spent many years in academia. I've spent many years on kind of the cutting edge of some of the sexiest technologies in the industry. But one of my first jobs was at an automotive assembly plant. And the things that I learned, didn't even have an engineering degree, barely had a semester under my belt. But the things that I learned from those people who had been working in this plant, who'd been working on cars, on building cars and designing, on assembling cars, the things that I learned from them about what they could do with their hands and what they could see in terms of, what you needed to do to create this perfect product. It blew me away. And it really shaped my own perception of where I wanted my career to go. Because I never, I don't want to be the person who knows everything. I don't want to be the person who has all the answers. I know I can't be. So it helps that I don't want to be. But what I want to do is I want to help those people who are experts, those people who are doing their job the way that, they've been trained by generations before them. How do we position ourselves to serve them? This is, at the end of the day, this is a servant leadership position. What I do, what you guys do, what all of us in the industry who care about technology and efficiencies, we're not ever going to solve this by ourselves. And we certainly don't have the perspectives to, come up with all the answers. But it's about, how do you understand the process well enough that you can figure out those incremental ways that you can at least present solutions and get that feedback.
I think this is a nice little dovetail. So you have all these people that have tons of experience, and then now you have access to all these conferences that they probably didn't go to, right? It was usually, like, as you mentioned, your VDC, your BIM manager, your CIO, maybe the president of the company. Rarely. I don't think in any of the conventions I saw, it's a handful of those guys. But you have, and they're typically younger, right? They're younger people in those positions. So through this, now allowing or having the ability for a lot of your veterans to experience some of the new tech, some of the things that are being released, and then with all their experience, they can see how this might be able to be implemented into their process, right? They're intimately familiar with the process, where maybe your BIM VDC guy isn't, or gal or whatever, right? They don't have quite the experience level, but they know the technology really well. So now this pairing of people with tremendous experience can be exposed, really, that's what it is at these conferences, be exposed to all this technology, and then work with somebody who might know the technology more intimately to, again, streamline those processes, much like you would have at an assembly plant or manufacturing facility, where you're kind of pairing technology and innovation with somebody that knows how a car gets put together, right? Or a building gets put together. So I think the dovetail of these two, and at a cost that a company can afford to put these people in, just creates tremendous innovation.
Absolutely. And that's how we change the industry, right? We're not here because we want to make small changes, or we're here because we want to do little things. We have grand visions, all of us. And I think the cool part is grand visions all start with small changes. They start with people, they start with culture. And everything that we've talked about goes back to, you know, if you're a leader, if you're someone listening who's the head of a company, you don't want to be the one who has all the answers, because think of how limited the focus is then. So the opportunity then becomes bringing people in and giving people the chance, and then connecting them together and giving them the culture and giving them the trust that you are supporting them at all levels, entry level all the way up, so that these solutions, these ideas are coming from the top down and the bottom up, so that we can meet in the middle.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's just it's all about growth and setting our goals high. And you mentioned none of us are here for small changes. We have a saying that we use, that we're here to blow the doors off. We're not looking to just grow as a normal company grows and increase our profits or our revenue by 3% each year to cover inflation. We're here to completely blow the doors off of the construction world, of the GC side, what we do. And we're making these changes through culture, through building the team, and everything you just mentioned fits really well into that formula.
Absolutely. And I think it's also too, it's important to remember that this is not a problem that's solved by one trade or one company. This is a problem that belongs to all of us. And that's what's really powerful is, whether you're tackling communication in your company or you're tackling communication project wide on a job site or from the field to the office, there's so many ways to look at how we can help move things and move the needle.
Yeah, I agree.
I guess with this, so in implementing this change, right, because it can be a big daunting task, and like something like Procore, or even switching to BIM, right, from simple drawings, or going from paper to plan grid. So a lot of this can be a very daunting, overwhelming task. But you mentioned in one, it's making decisions, right? So to make a decision and move with it. And you don't have to implement this overnight, right? It's not a switch on type of task. It's an incremental thing, right? Doing a little bit every day. For the firms and companies that you've worked with, obviously being at a place like Milwaukee and now NECA, right? There's a lot of companies that you work with, and you're not just within kind of your own. You're seeing the industry as a whole, and seeing a lot of firms kind of grow or take these approaches. Now, I guess in working with all these companies across the industry, how have you seen companies really start to adopt this mindset? Or in some of the companies that maybe were, as we can be in construction, a little bullheaded, right, and unwilling to change, how have you seen kind of some of that adoption or those mindset shifts take place? Or what might be some catalysts to help firms that they want to change but are on the fence?
I think one thing that's incredibly important is to understand that just because we're talking about kicking the doors down, and just because we're talking about, everybody's got to move towards these big grand solutions, does not mean that they have to be employed in the same way. And we touched on this a little bit earlier in the conversation. So the first thing I would say, the very first thing, is figure out, identify the people who you're going to have as your champions. And it doesn't have to be the same people every time. And it doesn't have to be the same people for every task, but find people, elevate people, escalate people. And they could be the people who are having the problems. So let's say if your problem is something to do with the project workflow and how to make it smoother and how to, reduce the RFIs, you can work with the people who are, nose deep in the trenches. Or you can have people who, again, might be some of your leadership, might be some of your younger, more junior members of the team. But again, what that allows them to do is it allows them to feel like they have more ownership in the process. Bring them in and then give them the opportunity to understand and investigate what's going on, right? It's not about what solutions they think are the right solutions, even if they are the ones who are, again, nose deep in the process. What you want is you want them to take a moment, take a beat, and just lay out what's going on. Understand the situation end to end, whether it's workflows, whether it's value mapping, whether it's pain point analyses, whether it's a gap analysis, whether it's a SWOT. Use any tool you want, and there's a million out there. But the whole idea of it is understand what's happening, understand who the key players are, understand where things are stalling out. And then, and only then, only after you've investigated, can you really start to evaluate which solutions might be the right ones. And so many people they don't even start by evaluating which solutions might be the right ones for the problems they're having. They start by, hey, I heard this cool commercial, or I read this thing online about this new software or hardware solution, and they go straight to the solution. But if you haven't had the time or made the time to bring your people along with you, and it doesn't have to be everyone. It doesn't have to be everyone who touches the solution needs to, if you have 30 project managers, doesn't mean they all have to be in every single conversation, but get a good sample size and be respectful of their time and give them that opportunity. Give them that opportunity to figure out, what solutions are out there. And then once you have your solutions, I'm an engineer at heart, right? So I believe in force ranking. I believe in matrices to qualify. I believe in you figuring out, what is the weighted reason or the score that meant that you went with this solution versus that solution. And once you have something you want to try or test or trial, that's where you come in, and that's where you say, okay, if I want to see how successful this may be, I have to measure it. You cannot improve something that you are not measuring. You cannot. It's impossible. So there again, no matter what your measure is, whether it's time, whether it's safety metrics, whether it's a reduced number of clashes, if it's clash detection, everything you do, figure out your metrics and figure out a very deliberate way to pilot your solutions. Figure out a very deliberate way to implement these solutions in a controlled environment. And like all things that we have in our own everyday lives, you have to have a backup plan. You have to have a pivot. And so, whether your pivot is, okay, I tried this on one type of job site and it's not working. Let's evaluate why based on, this is what working looks like in terms of metrics. Or I tried this solution with this type of team, and the challenges that we have are around, maybe it's an educational challenge. Maybe people don't understand the software. Maybe it's a culture challenge. Maybe people don't understand the ROI that they get out of collecting data or out of, using a digital model. These are the pieces where you have to have in your mind and with your teams, you have to have contingency plans. And so often when people say pivot, they mean, well, I was doing this thing and it didn't work out, so I pivoted and I quit my job and I got a new career. And that's not a pivot. And what a pivot is, think of traveling in basketball, right? It's the idea of you keep all things the same, except for the specific things that you're going back to change. So you keep all your other variables the same as best as you can, and you change one thing, two things, and you see if that makes a difference. Because again, so often, I can't tell you the number of places I've been where you see sitting on the executive's, desk or sitting in their office, you see a virtual reality headset. You see an exoskeleton. You see, you talk to the IT team and they say, we've got this great software implemented. No one's using it. So it's how do you figure out those pieces? And how do you go through this process, this exercise to make sure that you're not just going into it with intention, but you're also going into the execution and the pilot with intention as well.
Beautifully said. Before I have another follow-up question to hear, where can everybody find you?
So you can find me at Tauhira at necanet.org. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me I mean, I think that's really it. It's funny because I'm a technologist and people tease me about not having Twitter. But again, that's the thing is everyone's at a different place in their life with where they adopt technology of their own. I'm also a mom. My son will turn 6 months old in a week or two. So where I am most days is, working on construction problems during the day and hanging out with a baby at night. So, you could find me in my son's nursery. But again, I encourage you, I implore you, reach out. I would love to talk with anyone. I'm enjoying, although potentially overpowering this conversation, but I do think the people connection is the most important part.
I absolutely agree with you. And your basketball reference was spot on. I'm really glad you brought that up because it's something to keep in mind, right? The whole pivoting, pivot has become a catchphrase and a buzzword like core values have. And, there's lots of other ones now. And until people start using these techniques and these aspects correctly, they don't do anything. You can't implement a pivot in business or in life if what you're doing is what you said and turning tail and running away and starting over again. That's a whole different technique or whole different term. So, but to bring the basketball role in, I like that a lot. Thank you.
Oh, well, I mean, I have to say my basketball days ended in 7th grade gym, but the lessons that were learned have remained with me.
Perfect. I've coached 7th grade basketball, so I do.
I think this is, so we hit on a few really good points in here, and like everybody out there, right? So Tauhira has her follow-ups from conferences. I take notes like crazy, and that is still analog for me. Like as much as I'm a software company and do a lot of electrical engineering design, BIM, all that kind of good stuff. But like I still take a ton of handwritten notes and go through a good, ledger sheet of notes of probably a month. So for everyone out there, like one of the things that I do want to emphasize besides note taking is data and really measurement, right? So we hit on data collection, measurement, and I'm always astounded by the number of firms that, especially, so I come from the design side, and how many firms can't say off the bat, right? Like how many hours something takes them to do, right? Like they don't have an hours per square foot of design, right? Some standard metric that they can then, extrapolate for any given building, because everything is quote unquote unique, right? Or every project's different in some way, or Bob really screwed this one up for us, or whatever the thing might be for a given project that comes across. But that was always one thing that I tried to push heavily was, hey, we should know a dollars per square foot and hours per square foot on the design side of what this takes, so we can bid this accurately, we can budget for it appropriately. But there was always a pushback in, uniqueness. But with that, I guess to a lot of these points, on the electrical side, like and contractors, right? They know how much and estimate it based on like how much time it takes to install a light or an outlet or given linear feet of pipe. So through this, maybe what are some of the more specific examples that you've seen to really help, I guess, clarify the data points, the pieces that people should really be measuring against, and what KPIs you've seen in particular across the industry that people might help to get started with?
I think one of the biggest things when people talk about KPIs, and it's a big initiative for NECA as well, is you have to start somewhere. You have to start where you're at. And so many times, again, I worked in computer science when AI and machine learning were still neural networks. So back before we even had that cool branding. And so the idea here is that you have to really it's all about process. It's all about process. And so you have to understand your process. And from understanding that workflow, it helps you to understand the gaps and the miseries, the pain points, the challenges, the breakdowns. But it also helps you to understand what can be measured. Because again, maybe you need fantastic software, but maybe all you need is a stopwatch. And maybe you don't even need a stopwatch. Maybe all you need is your phone to be able to measure, how long does it take you to do this repeatable task? And, maybe what you need is Excel to be able to make a Gantt chart and to see how your project is progressing. Or maybe you can use this fantastic software and it can help you, use AI to determine the health of your, your project or your job site. All of these solutions are great. Just depends on where you are. And again, what I would caution anyone is think very tactically about how do you want to measure success. So if you think of something like, all right, I'm going to use a stopwatch to measure this process, understand, what sort of baseline are you at today? And what sort of improvement are you looking for short term, midterm, long term? And again, I'll tell you what you can't do is go around a job site waving a stopwatch without, any sort of preamble or explanation on what you're doing or why. So take the time to bring your team along. Take the time to help people to understand, like, oh, I'm just trying to figure out, are you spending half your day looking for tools or equipment? Are you spending half your time, like, yeah, it's great that you're doing offsite construction or prefab, but there's little to no communication between the field and the fab shop. So at the end of the day, like, everything's getting delivered in the wrong way or the wrong time, or, these are the pieces that are the building blocks that give you a good foundation.
I would suggest that everybody, when this comes out on the podcast version, they rewind it here for the last 3 minutes and listen to that over and over again, because that is perfect and it is spot on. Your comment about thinking tactically about how you want to measure success. It's so powerful because we're all going to be different, whether you're a GC or a designer or in the electrical field or whatever it is you do. We all have different goals and we all have different motivations, and to really map that out ahead of time is what's going to help drive to that goal. You have to have the roadmap before you go on the trip, so to speak.
I think that's very true. And it reminds me of, again, I still know people who will print out a, MapQuest set of directions. And there is not a dang thing wrong with using MapQuest versus using Google Maps versus using Garmin versus looking at the sun. If the sun gets you to figure out east and west and north and south, do what you need to do. But again, figure out what's right for you.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think, this comes down to, it's the curse of knowledge, right? So those of us that are further along down the path of technology or just engrossed in this stuff and think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread have really gone down the rabbit hole of technology and software and AI and robotics and whatever. And we don't always bring everybody else along for the learning journey that we've been on, right? And that could be years in the making in some cases, right? To understand everything that we do about it. You got to remember and go back to when you were just starting, what you wanted to know, what things clicked for you along that, and try to bring everyone else along that journey with you to make it as clear as possible for everybody else so they understand where you are. And I'm sure if you ask people on a job site, if you're bringing a stopwatch around and telling them why you're doing it, you're going to get a lot of helpful comments back on what could be improved, right? A lot of people have a lot of opinions on different things, and just by asking, you'll get a lot of feedback.
Absolutely. And you can have the best solution in the world, and you may know that it's the best solution in the world, and the president of your company may agree with you that it's the best solution in the world, but if you don't implement it the right way, it will fail. It will fail. So make sure that you take the time to invest, because if you have the best solution in the world, then give it the time it needs.
We are approaching the end of our time here together, and I don't know about you, Matt, but I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Tauhira, what final parting words would you like to impart on our audience?
I would say that instead of thinking about this as there's so much out there, it's overwhelming, what do? I don't have time to do anything. Think of the next one thing you can do. for all of our listeners out there, what's one thing you can do? It may be subscribe to a newsletter. It may be, Google me. It may be connect with me on LinkedIn. It may be connect with Matt or Dylan. It may be listen to this podcast. Just pick one thing that you can do. And it's by picking these one little things at a time. That's how we change the industry, and that's how we change the world.
That's awesome. Tauhira, I'm so glad that you came on. I wasn't in the roundtable. I was watching it that day. I called Dylan afterwards and said, man, we need to get her on the podcast because you have a way of speaking. You have a level of engagement that you can sense it. And it's been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for the opportunity. I told you my favorite part of, the end of a week is to be inspired. And this was a lot of fun. I appreciate the time.
Guys, go back and listen to this episode again. There's tons of nuggets on starting small, right? We're not trying to solve the world in a day. Rome wasn't built in a day. We all know buildings are not built in a day, no matter what the owner might want. So just knowing that wherever you are is okay, right? Wherever you are is perfectly fine. Just look at improving, adding that 1% each and every day. Again, whether that's just learning, whether it's implementing, whether it's sharing a story with your team, going to some conferences and bringing some other people along, or making that phone call back to somebody you met, whether virtually or in person, whenever we can do those again at a conference to kind of connect, be held accountable, and to continue to move forward. So Tauhira, thank you so much. Guys, go connect with her on LinkedIn and follow the podcast that NECA puts out and the team there to learn everything that you need to know about what's going on in the electrical industry. And I'm sure that cover way more across the industry. So thank you all for watching. And that's going to be this episode of the Construction Corner podcast.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
See ya.